Misinformation is officially a top-tier global risk, and it's being fueled by the very tool we're all rushing to adopt, AI.
But it's not just a branding headache. We're talking about a fundamental shift from reactive crisis management to proactive, outside-in strategies.
From the hidden tracks of Davos to the quiet tension of workforce transformation, we're looking at why every job is about to be reinvented, and why your culture might be the only thing that saves your strategy.
Plus, the new C-suite math, intelligence per dollar per watt, and why the CFO and CIO both think they own the same piece of the pie.
This is the pre-read. Just like the slides you get before a big meeting, the pre-read prepares you, CFOs, and other executives for the next big thing. It's the global podcast where finance, sustainability, audit, and risk teams come together in the C-suite.
If you're making decisions at scale or need to understand the leaders who are, you're in the right place. This is the pre-read brought to you by Workiva. I'm Steve Soder, accounting enthusiast and Diet Coke aficionado.
And I'm Melissa Zucker, sustainability nerd and equal opportunist caffeine addict. Today, we're kicking off a short mini-series focused on the conversations that were occurring at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. In this episode, we're focused on reactions to the Global Risk Report.
That's right, Alyssa. And while neither you nor I had the pleasure of going in person, our colleague and Workiva Chief Sustainability Officer, Mandi McReynolds, got to speak with a ton of interesting people while she was on site. Mandi, welcome back to the show.
Great to be here with both of you. Thanks so much for having me back.
Always a pleasure to have you. So, the World Economic Forum recently released its annual Global Risk Report. And for the first time, we're seeing a shift in the hierarchy of fear. Misinformation, supercharged by AI, has climbed to the number 2 spot on the global risk landscape. Mandi, can you give us a bit of an overview of the report?
What I love about the Global Risk Report, Alyssa and Steve, is that it looks at a broad base of global leaders from all different sectors, including Workiva, our customers, and global political leaders to academics. So you really get this holistic view of how the world is thinking about risk over the next 2 years and 10 years. I find it very insightful and very informative for me because it helps me get a snapshot on both the short and long-term risk living within our society. So here's what I do when I pull out the risk report, and it comes out every year from the World Economic Forum. I look to see what's new, what's changing, what risk categories, whether it's economical, political, societal, environmental, or technological, are shaping how we're transitioning risk. Now, here's what's really, really fascinating. When you sit down in Davos and you're talking to maybe a chief risk officer or chief sustainability officer or CFO or CEO, many of them are reading the risk report and thinking about how their business is shaping into this dynamic, changing world of risk. And one of the things you couldn't get away from was misinformation, like Alyssa said, really moving the needle because AI has shifted that risk so much in the short and in the long term.
Thanks for that background, Mandi. Now, let's get to our first 3 interviews. To understand what this all means for the brand and the balance sheet, Mandi, you sat down with Ami Badani, Chief Marketing Officer of ARM, who's seeing this information war play out in real time. Ami argues that for the modern C-suite, managing AI isn't just about adoption. It's about defending the very certainty of the information that your organization provides to the world. So with that, let's go to Mandi's conversation with Ami.
We wanted to bring you in because in the World Economic Global Risk Report, misinformation had kind of risen to the top in both short-term and long-term, particularly because of AI. And it has so many major brand implications. And so we thought it would be fun to talk to you because as we think about the CFO, the CIO, and the Chief Sustainability Officer, they've got to think about what is going to happen with this becoming a number 2 global risk, and how do they think about this for the brand area? So tell us, how have your conversations at Davos reshaped some of your thinking for 2026 on this topic of misinformation and risk?
Last year, when I was at Davos, there was a lot of sort of fear around adoption of AI. And, that risk, I think, was sort of very pervasive across pretty much every session and every discussion I had. This year, I sort of think about, the risk conversation in terms of AI. I think people are embracing it a lot more than they had in the past. And I think that sort of gives you certainty that AI is here to stay, and people are really having an open mindset of adopting AI in their workflows. I think what we haven't quite figured out, certainly for my role, and many chief marketing officers are thinking about this as we've had discussions at Davos, is with AI, there's sort of risk reward. One is you can propagate information super quickly, which is good, in terms of being able to just have information out there, your narrative is sort of propagating across many different audiences. But at the same time, the downside is the misinformation, as you mentioned. So I think there's the kind of the brand reputation that we need to think about that we haven't really thought about before. And it's not a reactive, meaning if there's misinformation, how do you react to it? It's more about thinking about, okay, what are those signals in the market? And how do we create certain certainty of information and make sure that the information that's being propagated isn't misinformation? So we have to think about it sort of as a proactive, not as a reactive, in terms of you don't want to think about things, when there's a crisis, but you want to think about how you actually propagate some of that information up front when you think about how these new AI tools will really be part of your tool set with creating content and information. So that's sort of, I think, more of the discussion. I don't think we've solved that, but I think technology is going to get better. And so you'll have sort of, as you do in many platforms where you're able to verify and validate whether the information is accurate and correct and coming from the right sources. I think that's how AI will get over time. You'll be able to validate and verify before, unleashing some of that content. So that's how I think the evolution of AI is going to change.
I love where this conversation's going, because so much of the conversation with the CFO, CIO, Chief Sustainability Officer often talks about the internal side. Right, the internal side. And you're really articulating the external side. And one thing, Steve Soter, who's a co-host on the show, we talked about several years ago as we were beta testing AI and other elements that we were like, think about not your internal, think about your external stakeholders, like your customers using AI first, which now we know, right? Your investors using AI first, which now we know. Right. And we talked about, imagine a day as regulators, come into this space, and the data, like you said, that's being fed to them, which could be false in some ways, or it could be true, like they might be pulling it from a Reddit thread that we talk about. So as you're seeing this shift, how do you look at your other C-suite colleagues to say we've got to operate as a unit to manage this AI bubble and think beyond this risk of internal and energy, but actually think about what's going on externally and building this common language? What's one piece of practical advice you have for them to join you in this effort?
My perspective is we take an outside-in approach, and I think a lot of my C-suite colleagues would probably comment on the same. We sort of align around a shared vision around it's obviously you have to manage risk internally, but it's also sort of the market landscape and an outside-in approach. So that's sort of one. I think also aligning across a kind of a common set of metrics around what that's going to look like in terms of managing risk is super important for CFOs, CISOs, et cetera. So, for example, you could align around intelligence per dollar per watt and, sort of thinking about an underlying metric, because then it's not everyone sort of in these silos operating in vacuums, but really around a shared kind of common framework or vision with sort of an outside-in approach. That's sort of the way I think about it.
I love how you're thinking about it. And thank you so much for providing this unique perspective to the show and really unpacking for us how we can be better partners together, thinking about both our internal and external stakeholders as AI comes to the forefront for all C-suite leaders.
Thanks for having me.
Ami's outside-in approach highlights a critical truth. If the market doesn't trust your data, then your strategy doesn't matter. But defending that certainty requires a workforce that can keep up.
That brings us to our next guest. Rob Fisher is the Global Head of Advisory at KPMG. Rob works with global organizations to move AI from cool pilot to true enterprise scale.
That's right, Alyssa. Anytime I have the moment to have a quiet conversation with Rob, I always learn something new or a great way and perspective to think about an issue like AI. Rob identified this quiet tension in the office of the CFO, where we are spending billions on tech, but we're actually under investing in humans who have to run it. Rob's radical dollar for dollar rule that every leader should be listening to and needs to hear in this moment really had me sitting up in my seat as I was talking to him and saying, let's really lean into this idea. So let's get into Rob's perspective.
This conversation in Davos, it's like the focus is on scale. Like, how do you go from proofs of concept or, deploying basic AI to, hey, we want to have agents at scale running enterprise processes, right? And so their focus is on security and trust and data, and sovereignty is a huge topic here in Davos. But for me, like, maybe one hidden one is just workforce impact, right? I really think it's underestimated how impactful it is to people, beyond just, people worry about job displacement, but like every job is going to get reinvented, right? And so when I think about historical technology transformation, which I think is far less disruptive than this, change management is usually like the first thing that goes when you're cutting costs and cutting corners. Here, like our AI leader, Steve Chase, globally with me in the US, he says, for every dollar on the tech, you should be spending $1 on the workforce transformation. And I think we're well behind that because people, they've got to adapt. We've got some research coming out on adaptability and how organizations are going to bring people along that journey. And you've got to have the right culture, right? The culture of learning lots of things new, but also unlearning old ways of doing things. And I think, that is hugely impactful. And so I just don't know that I think that friction point is getting a ton of airtime right now.
It was so interesting. Yesterday, I was sitting with a CFO of a major Fortune 100 company, and one of the things we were talking about is, when else in the world would you have this time where you would have said change management is a lot about communication or structure? And for the first time, it is like all these executives are waking up and going, I have never thought more about learning and development in my lifetime to get this workforce ready. So, you talked a little bit about it as you think about adaptability. How can addressing this friction and investing in the workforce and looking at these topics together really guide organizations to be more resilient? Because that's the end goal. So like what can they do, or how does this put us on that pathway?
Yeah, well, I think, if I just think about, okay, what's it going to take to move the needle? I actually think, like, maybe it's corny, but like the culture that you have will really define how resilient you can be through this, right? Like if you have a culture where you can bring people along a journey, I love the old adage, the Peter Drucker adage, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? So you can have the greatest enterprise AI deployment strategy in the world, but if you don't have people coming along the journey, if they don't feel like you're investing in their learning, that you don't care about them as people and what their future looks like, then you're going to have real problems. Like one thing I've seen, and I'm not saying at KPMG we've nailed this or got it figured out, but super interesting information. I won't confuse correlation with causation. I'll be clear. I'm not saying it's cause, but correlation. We're seeing really interesting correlation between people who are feeling more work-life balance and they're heavier users of AI. Wow. And so, like, boy, if you can help people understand like that, like think of like sort of the cultural uplift you might be able to get if you can show those kinds of things. We're seeing things like increased job satisfaction as well. It's super interesting correlation that we're watching really, really carefully.
I love that you talk about both from the personal and professional side. In fact, Mike Ross, our chief strategy officer, this morning at Davos was at a panel here at the Journal House, and he was talking about as a user of AI, as a user of financial intelligence. He said how different it is to be right now, like many of our listeners, in the middle of annual reporting, filing season, to then be doing your day job and also being here at Davos and doing what you have to do, but then to be working on the 10K and having that intelligence behind you, what that does to maximize his time and bring that kind of balance. Right. Because we work with executives all over, like there is so much that they're doing. And it's neat to hear how your study is showing correlation between personal satisfaction and professional satisfaction. So what's one practical advice you have as CFOs, CIOs, chief sustainability officers are all coming together, and they've got to, we've said it before in past episodes and shows, it's a team sport. You got to get the band together was our old phrase. But we got to break down these silos.
Yeah.
So what can we do? What can we do?
Yeah. So what's funny, we did some research last year, and this was specific to CFOs and CIOs. 60% of CFOs and 60% of CIOs both said that they owned AI for the organization. It's like those numbers add up to more than 100. So right off the bat, to your point, you have different viewpoints, and those have to get reconciled out in some way. And I think it really is, how do you collaborate across the C-suite? So, joint steering committees where you're really thinking about it from all angles, the financial viability, the sustainability impact, the technology strategy you're taking, the security and the risk considerations, privacy, explainability, all these things. Like, you've got to be able to work on that. And then, to make it really stick, you have to have some kind of common understanding of, okay, what does return on investment look like to us? And what are the metrics we're going to use to really understand that holistically? And then let's have shared accountability for those metrics. And so, you can obviously run to, here's our budget for it and here's what we spent, but that's like really surface. It needs to be a balanced focus. Like, okay, customer satisfaction, are we seeing improvement around, time save obviously is a pretty big one that everyone wants to look at. Risk reduction, can we see tangible areas of risk reduction or increased resilience, or, if we've got some energy consumption goals around our use of AI, like how we're progressing against those as well. So all those things, a balanced scorecard approach that all of those executives have shared accountability in, I think that's probably, the biggest thing that organizations can do.
So closing question, as we round out your first Davos experience, and you take in all these inputs from this week, what is one question you are asking your executive team or board to spark more dialogue in 2026?
KPMG, we have this mantra as partners that we are owners, operators, and stewards of our business. And so AI is everyone's responsibility, but as leaders, it's really our responsibility. And so the first question is are you visibly leading, tone from the top, by showing in your everyday flows that you're leveraging AI, that you're using it yourself to challenge, to push, to change ways of working. In your example earlier, to get the time back to be able to do all those different things all at once. But I think the second question is, and this is really if I think about professional services for our partners, right? They're all a domain or an industry expert in something. Can they answer the question, what is the impact of AI on your domain or industry, functional area of expertise? Because I don't need everyone to be an AI expert on the tech, but if you are not very conversant, very thoughtful about the impact of AI on that thing you do, if you don't know how to talk to clients about that, you're irrelevant, moving forward. So I just, for clients as well, in their area, the thing that they work on, if the leader hasn't thought about, hey, what is the impact of AI on my area? Again, I'd have to question relevance.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the challenge, and look forward to hearing maybe your reflections in year 2.
Yeah, sounds good, Mandy.
The friction Rob describes, this gap between tech spend and human adaptability, is where systemic risk lives. If we can't bridge that gap, then we can't build resilience.
To close out this look at the Global Risk Report, Mandy, you spoke with Robin Hodess, the CEO of GRI.
Robin sits at this unique intersection between business and government, helping companies simplify how they're reporting non-financial data.
We know that there's geoeconomic shocks as a short-term concern, as well as environment risk as a big long-term threat. In your view, because you talk to companies in your GRI role as CEO, around how does simplified, transparent data and reporting really help leaders focus on what matters most? So I'm really curious from your perspective, how do we get these companies from the storming of the headlines and uncertainty and risk to really think about how they can move the needle in planning for their organizations and building resilience?
Well, reporting is about information, and we need information for power. We need information for decision making. So it's so critical that companies have at their fingertips the kind of information that comes out of using standards, having sustainability reporting that they can use for their own strategy, for their own change process, for attracting talent, for attracting also investment. It's really a risk mitigation tool for companies to make sure they're ahead of the curve and they're really riding the wave of change that's happening in business today.
I value so much that you say riding the wave of change. You talk to both executives and governments. If you pull back the curtain, are these bilateral one-on-one conversations? And what critical issue do you think are facing your CEO and global peers that is currently maybe being overlooked or not talked about as much?
Yeah, I think there are some real structural challenges that aren't as apparent on the agenda, looking at systemic risk in infrastructure and inequality, even from nature, longer term. And unless we really air the political around the systemic risk, it'll be hard to make progress. And it's very, very important as companies and governments and investors come together here that we do work on how to establish goals together. Yeah, it's critical that we keep the conversation going, no matter the challenges, no matter the differences in political winds. We really need to make sure that business is looking forward, that business is enabled to bring the innovation that we know it can bring. Because at the end of the day, business is about people, and it's about the lives and livelihoods that they have based on business and the economy.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for giving a few moments of your thought and peeling back the curtain for all of our listeners on the conversations happening right here in Davos.
Thank you.
Okay, 3 leaders and one common thread. Information integrity is the new frontline of risk management.
Whether it's defending your brand like Ami, reskilling your workforce like Rob, or standardizing your impact like Robin.
In the next episode, you'll hear why traditional ROI is being challenged and how simple white-font hacks are creating a new breed of cybersecurity doppelgangers that every CFO needs to watch out for. And then in our mini-series final, I spoke with leaders on the future of the human coworker. We'll discuss why some of the world's largest firms are already merging their HR and AI departments, and why unlearning old habits is now the most critical skill in your career.
Well, I can't wait to hear those conversations. Thanks for your reporting from Davos, Mandi, and for joining us here today.
Thank you all for having me back in studio. It's wonderful to be with you.
And thank you again to our guests, Ami Badani, Rob Fisher, and Robin Hodess. This has been the pre-read brought to you by Workiva, the world's only unified platform for financial reporting, sustainability, audit, and risk.
We've got more insights and hot takes coming your way, so be sure to follow or subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your edge.
And if you like the show, please leave a review, send it to someone you love, or just shout it out on your next team call.
We'll see you next time. Until then, go lead it like you mean it. I'm Alyssa Zucker, and that's Steve Soder. Our lead producer is Mike Ravagno, with additional production support by Renee Lee and Mandi McReynolds. Audio engineering is handled by Drew Hayes.
Pedro Sousa is our graphic designer. Transcripts are created and edited by Courtney Kimsey. And thanks to our digital and social team, Mike Berg, Katie Carr, and Michael Karnowski.